Welcome to Women of the Military podcast. I'm so excited to have Diana here. She is also a author, and so I'm excited to not only hear about her time in the military, about her book, The Peak Experiment, that I had a chance to read. So I'm excited to welcome you to the show. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is really neat.
So let's start with, why did you decide to join the military?
Sure. Well, I guess I decided to join initially because I, like a lot of folks, I was drawn to the challenge of it, right? I think as a kid, I had, whenever I learned that such a thing as the FBI existed, I thought, oh, I want to be an FBI agent. And as I got older, I didn't really know how to do that. So, I think I filled out like a high school interest form, and I bubbled in military, and I started getting like recruiting stuff, and I actually got an invitation to the Naval Academy summer seminar through that. I've since learned that a lot of times folks have to apply, but perhaps at the time, it was a newer program or something. I'm not really sure. It might just be my demographic as well, because at the time there were fewer women. And so, I was invited to do that. And I did two things that summer. I went to like a medical, for like high schoolers interested in medicine. I went to it was called the National Youth Leadership Forum on Medicine. Can't believe I still remember that, but I do. And I went to that, and then right after that, I went to Annapolis for summer seminar, and I thought, okay, this is my thing, not this. And so, yeah, that pretty much sealed it for me at that point.
And so did you end up going to Annapolis for your college?
I did, yes. And it was a little bit of a roundabout way that I did it. So, I did the summer seminar, and I just loved the experience, even though it was also kind of a shock. I don't come from a military family. And so I really went into it cold turkey in hindsight, not really knowing what to expect, and not really knowing what the tuition was, which is, you don't pay tuition there. And so, but yeah, so I ultimately did go to the Naval Academy. But after I went to summer seminar, I said, okay, I was a senior in high school at that point, and I thought, okay, I'm going to apply, and started getting my papers together. It's quite a long process. You've got to get like a service, congressional nomination and things like this. And I quickly, when I didn't get my congressional nomination, I was kind of like, oh, like I don't know if I'm gonna be able to like get a spot, or get an appointment is what they call it. And so probably about December of my senior year, I thought, okay, I got to think of my plan B. And so I said, okay, I'm going to enlist. I'm going to reapply. That's what I thought. And so I said, I'll go to my commuter school, local, university here, which is a great university. And I will just reapply the following year. And so when I went, as now a freshman in college to reapply, now, taking like chemistry and calculus, like they tell you to, I still ran into a roadblock at my, for the nomination process. And at that point I thought, man, like, same thing again, I'm still like, just not competitive enough to get a nomination here. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to go talk to my recruiter. And I did. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps as a reservist, and I went through boot camp. I left college for the spring semester, went to boot camp. And during my boot camp process, I was actually offered a nomination for Fleet Marines coming to the Naval Academy at that point. And so that just lifted that barrier for me, and I had the academics. And so I was offered an appointment to the Naval Academy. So that's how I made my way in there.
I love hearing your story because so many people think it's like a straightforward process. And number one, what I've learned from the podcast is I already knew it was hard, but like I didn't realize, I think, how hard it was until I started talking to people. And then also there's more than one path. Like sometimes people think, oh, there's only this one way to do it, but there's a bunch of different paths that can get you into the academies, especially if you're facing roadblocks in the what's traditionally known as the traditional path that most people use, but not all people. There's all these other. So that's a really cool story. I love hearing that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, you're totally right. At the time, I remember being a high schooler and thinking like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I didn't get in, and I'm going to be set back a year, and in hindsight, gosh, now as adults, you're like, a year is nothing. If you've got to reapply, if you've got to, you go about it a different path, whatever, to address whatever the roadblock is, maybe it's, your SAT scores aren't high enough, or your academics or whatever. A lot of times they'll offer people the Naval Academy prep school, for example, and other avenues, and it's really like, I think people have to keep in mind the long game. And, and also it really just depends on, a lot of times, gosh, like the more populated states are going to be more challenging, not to take away from anyone coming from, but just the numbers of, how many people are competing for those few nominations in your state. And so anyway, but yeah, definitely several different avenues for people who really, really want it,
Yeah. And I know I said that we would talk about your book later, but I feel like your book has a lot of you in the story. I only talked to you for a few minutes, but like,
yeah.
Did that draw a lot of inspiration? Because your novel is fictional. It's like in the history. It's in the future, not the history. It's in the future, but it's based at a military academy. So did that have a lot of impact to play on like how you wrote your novel?
Yeah, it really did, actually. I think since it is my first book, and when one sets out to say, okay, I'm going to write a novel, you're like, oh my gosh, like where do I even begin? And so there's that old adage, write what you know. and so I said, okay, I'm going to, just start there. And so it's some sort of a kind of a hodgepodge between my Naval Academy experience and my experience at the basic school as a, Marine officer. And yeah, so I did draw a lot of inspiration from like what it felt like to be in that particular time of your career and of your life, that you're starting your career and you're very young, but you have a lot in front of you, and so yeah, I hope that came through in the book.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was interesting to hear. I like the futuristic part, but then I knew that it was also very similar to like the people I've talked to about what being in an academy is like, and so I thought you did a good job of that part of the story. It was believable, and you captured the like emotion of what senior cadets feel as they're getting close to the end. So I think so.
Oh, great. Well, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you. Yeah.
So let's continue on and talk a little bit about your time at the Naval Academy. What was that experience like?
Yeah, wow, what a great question. It was a good experience. It was tough. I will also say that, right? Like I said, I didn't come in. I don't have a military background in my family, and so and even having come from, like I said, I'd gone through Marine Corps boot camp, and then I went to the Naval Academy. But Paris Island, what they're trying to accomplish there, and what the Naval Academy is trying to accomplish, they're trying to do two different things. And so, one did not necessarily prepare me. In fact, I feel like it was actually kind of tough coming in from that perspective, having been around professional drill instructors who are molding you to be a Marine, versus when you go to, one of the service academies and it's, you're upperclassmen. I mean, they're not professionals, and they're really learning leadership off of you, and you are kind of learning your place in that particular organization. So it's quite different. And so, so I found that pretty challenging. And then the other thing I found challenging was, being, I won't lie, like being a minority, like I did feel that, I think I've explained that it does at times feel like a guy's locker room, not that I've ever been in a guy's locker room, but I guess what I imagine a guy's locker room would be like. And I think that that's probably improved, but, and I frankly just don't have another college experience to really go off of. I was a commuter student otherwise, so that's quite different. But yeah, so, but ultimately, I had nice memories while I was there. I met my husband there, so we shared that time together, which was really special. And now my son wants to go there, and so that's really, that would really warm my heart, if things ended up that way. And so, so yeah, it is a special place, for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. Yeah. I don't think I've talked to anyone who's like, oh, yeah, the academy, it was easy. No problem. No, more it's like, it was really hard, but I gained a lot from it. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you you went through a program where you were going to go back into the Marine Corps after you graduated. Is that correct?
No, actually. So what a lot of people don't know is that when you come from the fleet, I'm doing, quote to air quotes for, audio listeners, but when you come from the fleet, and I say that because I didn't really come from the fleet, but when you come from that status and you're coming from, the enlisted ranks to go to the Naval Academy, you actually get issued a DD-214. So you get discharged from the Naval or from the Marine Corps. You're no longer a Marine, and you are now a midshipman, and that is your rank. And so when you go through the Naval Academy and through the years, once you finally get to your senior year, you have to compete for a spot in the Marine Corps and a commission in the Marine Corps, just like everybody else. So sometimes folks don't get it. It just sort of depends on, and sometimes people choose not to. I can think of several Marines who decided to pursue careers in the Navy. And so, it just sort of depends, but, and it depends a lot about, what the climate is in that particular class, and geopolitically how much in demand the Marine Corps is versus something else. I think my year, a Navy pilot was the one that was really in demand. Marine Corps was also competitive, but I think like my husband's class was maybe more competitive. I just happen to know that because he was in there, but, that might be anecdotal though. So actually it is anecdotal. There's no data there. So, but yeah, that's just kind of very generally how that works. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you ended up going in the Marines or staying in the Navy?
So I decided I wanted to go back in the Marine Corps. And so I competed for my spot, in the Marine Corps. I think gosh, at least my year, I feel like we commissioned about 200 Marines from my class, so after the Naval Academy, went into the Marine Corps as a commissioned second lieutenant, and then pursued my career after that.
Yeah, so let's talk about your career and what happens after you graduate.
Yeah, so everyone goes to, so Marine options, which I was, everyone goes to the basic school, and that's 6 months long. And, so you do that, and then you do, then from there, everyone has to compete for their occupational specialty. At the time, combat MOSs were not open to women. So, which is really funny. I feel kind of old, like, like now that I'm like, if my daughter was to join, it would be different, And so, but that's how it was when I went through. And so we all competed. And in fact, a lot of that kind of culture made its way into my book as well, of competing for your spot and whatever. And so I went into ground supply and got stationed in Southern California, Camp Pendleton. So probably near where you live now, and did a tour there, and then did a B billet, and then I left the service. I did a little bit beyond my obligated time, but about 5.5 years. But it was, it went by fast, to be honest. Looking back.
Yeah. So yeah, I just lost my train of thought of where to go.
I said a lot.
So you only did the 5 years, and like you said, it went by quick. What was the thing that led you not to stay in after those first 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I always had it in my mind that I would make an exit as after my obligated time, and go to business school, and kind of go into mid-level management and some corporate job from there, and that would be that would be that. So I think, it's funny even because not having once again, not having had, military in my family, when you're there, I guess 20 years feels like a long, like, oh my gosh, like, such a long time is not. I've got friends now who are hitting their 20 and I'm like, oh, I guess that wasn't that long. And so, yeah, I think that was kind of always in my head. I'm serving in the reserves now. In fact, because I had left and I was, I'm going to go to business school. I'm going to, what I actually did was had 2 children. And, and so that took up my time. But, and so, yeah, after a few years, I thought, I'm not really ready to give it up completely. And so I affiliated with a reserve unit and I'm currently serving in the reserves, which I really enjoy.
That's really cool. I love that you took the time off to have your family and now you're back in the reserve, so you're still serving. That's a really cool story. And you mentioned earlier that you met your husband at the Naval Academy. And when did you guys get married in this whole crazy journey of serving in the military?
Yeah, we got married the weekend that I graduated, actually. So, which is another funny thing because a lot of folks will couple up while they're, at Navy, college sweethearts, if you will. And the best advice that all of the officers on the yard, as we call them, all the mentors there, they all tell us, don't get married graduation weekend because people, split up all the time, because you basically have, this whole career in front of you, and it's going to take you different places, and so it's hard for a marriage to go through, especially a young marriage. But we were in love, and we still are, so so it works out. But yeah, we got married right after graduation at the chapel, which so once again, the Naval Academy is a special place to me for that.
And did he graduate the same year as you?
He was a year ahead of me.
Okay.
Yeah. There was one year that, we've always been a little bit staggered, as far as career, but on the other hand, it did always work out, and I mean, it's funny. I think it just depends. A lot of times, even folks, in different services, one might go Navy, one might go Marine Corps, and they figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. And so did he transition out at the same time that you did, or?
He transitioned out before me. So he was, he left in 2011 and then I left in 2013. Okay. It's funny because, you think back and you're like, gosh, this is like 5 years of transitioning for everyone.
And then you had a family, more transition and more craziness. Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's talk about like you leaving the military and what that whole experience was like and starting your family.
Yeah. So, I guess I should backpedal a little bit. I had my son in 2010. So I was still on active duty, and so that was great and wonderful. But just like reality of it, folks were rotating in and out. In fact, my husband left for Afghanistan 3 weeks after our son was born, and it's funny, I'm sure a lot of your listeners, will totally like agree that it feels very normal at the time because everyone is going through this. But you look back and you're like, that was really hard, like on this whole community of, just families getting shuffled around, and these are dangerous places to go to, and so my son was around when I was still on active duty, and so kind of figuring that out and trying to be there for him and do all the normal things you want, like wanting to nurse him and pump and all this all this kind of stuff that you're like, oh gosh, like So yeah, by the time I had my daughter, I was transitioning out. And so, but that was a different challenge there too, which I'm sure, your listeners will get to, that it's, you're used to working, you're used to, not seeing other adults and being kind of very active. And then you go to being a stay-at-home mom, and it can be pretty isolating. And plus you're out of the service. And so you don't have that anymore, you know. I mean, I guess you do kind of in theory, but like whatever your support network was around that kind of, it changes dramatically. And so I found that to be pretty tough, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I transitioned out when my son was born, and I had that same like feeling of like losing my identity and losing my community. And even though we didn't move, like every did my internet freak out?
Yes, it did a little bit,
Okay.
but I think we're good now. But you were saying about,
That it was really hard for me to leave the military. Yeah, I left when my son was born, and it was like a lot of emotions, and we didn't move, but like everything about the situation of where I was living was different. I wasn't active duty anymore, and so that was really hard.
yeah,
So
exactly. Like you could be in the same place, but the situation is just so different, and your day to day is so different. So yeah, definitely.
yeah, and losing that identity of service is really hard, and I don't think the military, definitely not back then, talked about it enough about like you're losing a piece of yourself and you can't just fill it in with like a new job. It's really hard. So,
It
and
is.
and one of the other things you talked about was like people coming and going and like how we thought that was normal. Like I think in the military space we kind of just got used to it and like expected people to just be like, this is how it is, suck it up, and not allow people to be like, this is hard and I'm struggling. And so I think looking back we're kind of like, oh my goodness, what were we doing? It was really hard to deal with all that challenge and upheaval of our lives.
Yeah, all that change, you know, just constant change and, you know, yeah. But yeah, it was, I don't know. It's funny, like, I mean, I suppose we'll be a little bit better about it. I hope we become a little bit more sensitive. I think the dialogue is at least trending in that direction, you know, that people at least feel empowered to say, you know, this is hard and this kind of sucks. You know?
Well, just to think, like, your husband left 3 weeks after your son was born, and now husbands or partners get 12 weeks of maternity leave, just like the mothers do. And how, like, he didn't even get he got 3 weeks and then he was gone. And, like, now, yeah. And back then it was like 10 days, and now it's 12 weeks. The
Yeah,
military's changed a lot.
you're right. That's right. I forgot about that. How paternity leave was 10 days. I mean, that's like,
10
yeah,
consecutive days, not 10 Monday through Friday, 10 days.
you're right. I'd completely forgotten about that until you mentioned that. But yeah, that is bad. You know, like it's like, hey, we just expect you ladies to fly in your mom or whoever, you know, help
Yeah.
each other out. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's that is good that that's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, because it is really hard. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to jump to your book. Do you want to talk about your book now, or do you want to talk about like between the time you left and where you're at today? You
Oh,
get
I
to
guess
choose.
yeah, I guess I'll say that real quick. And so yeah, I you know have served in the reserves and I've really enjoyed that. And you know, it has been and as a stay-at-home mom, you know, I stayed home a total of 9 years. It was a fantastic way to keep some skills, you know, and keep relevant. And I think that that's what kind of led me to ultimately be able to have, you know, when I was finally ready to, okay, now it's like a good situation and I can go back to work full time, you know, have, you know, some work experience behind me to say some recent work experience, you know. I think that that's one thing a lot of us women struggle with when you stay home for a long time, that you're like, well, gee, I did this thing 10 years ago, you know. And so, you know, that can be pretty tough, like trying to stay, I guess, marketable and relevant and have something to offer and kind of current that you can say about yourself. So the reserves had really helped me with that. Writing had really helped me with that. And to have that confidence to be able to kind of move on and, you know, to where I'm at now. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what made you want to write a novel?
Um, well, you know, just like in a couple of things. So one was, you know, I needed like an intellectual project, I guess. You know, I was missing that in the day to day of, you know, just nurturing that you do as a stay at home mom when the kids are little. And so so there was that. And then there was also just, I think I had seen one of the Star Wars, I can't remember which one, but I was like, you know what, that was awesome. Like, I want to figure out how to tell a really good story. And so it was kind of the two things of you know, wanting to like investigate that in particular and like learn how to do that, and then have a project. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And I really enjoyed that the main protagonist was a female cadet,
Yeah.
and getting to hear it from her story. And just, I thought it was interesting. I just thought the whole premise of the book, it took me a few chapters to get into it. And then after that, I was like, ooh, I want to know what happens next. So I thought it was very different than what I normally read. So like, I was like, I am not as much of a like sci-fi drama. The drama was a little too much for me, but overall it was a great book, especially if you like that drama.
Okay, you mean like the kind of the tension, I guess, or like the
Yeah.
okay.
I'm a romantic comedy
Oh yeah.
pleasure reading, and this was not a romantic comedy. It was still fun to read. It was just different. I was like, this is not a book I need to read right before bed.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, I appreciate you saying that at any rate, because you know, I did design it that way, and so it makes me feel good that it's that it's come across right as a like, you know, kind of thriller, kind of, you know, keep reading kind of thing, like that, you know, you create the tension. And so, I mean, that's another thing that I enjoy a lot now, and that I've learned throughout this process is I really enjoy nerding out about storytelling. And so, yeah, this project has absolutely let me just be a huge nerd about all that, like the ways that you can, you know, ramp up, you know, tension,
Yeah.
and, you know, just whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Oh yeah, you did that. You were successful. Yeah, one time I read it right before bed and I had like the weirdest dreams, and I was like, okay, this is no longer a book you read right before bed.
That's hilarious. That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah, so like what was the inspiration, like besides your time in the military, but like why did you make it this like tension, drama, like suspense type book?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I guess like the first thing I will say as far as like inspiration, and I did want to, you know, specifically tell a story about this certain type of a female in this environment. And so you know, the sort who thinks that she's got it all figured out and she's really ambitious, and you know, but like she, you know, she hasn't, she's got a lot to learn about just life and people, you know. And so in that sense, it's a bit of a coming of age type of story, you know, where you realize that your heroes aren't quite who you thought they were, you know. It's more complicated. And so, you know, I wanted to talk about that. I also really wanted to talk about you know, because so one of the things when I said, okay, I'm going to write like a military science fiction, you know, book, I thought, okay, typically when you hear military science fiction, you think of a certain type of book, you know, you think about like the protagonist is a guy, and you know, there's maybe spaceships, or there's aliens, or there's you know, there's you know, some sort of like there's actual like combat, you know, or whatever. And there's not that in this book. And so I wanted to tell a different type of story, a different type of military book, just about like a young woman growing up in the world and in this environment. And so, you know, I wanted to, I guess, I wanted to give a reader that thriller experience, because that's kind of what you think when you're like, okay, military science fiction, like I'm going, this is gonna be a ride, you know, whatever. And so I wanted to give that, but I wanted to tell, like I said, this different kind of story. So, you know, not to disappoint, I guess, in one way, but not to have to do it, like do it differently, I guess, you know.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great in that aspect. it was like so different than anything that I've read by women veteran authors, and it's such a different story that isn't being told, and it has a lot of like, things that you could use to learn from like military situations. Like the different characters are all relatable to people that you know in the military, and so I thought overall it was good. I was just like, I do not like science fiction. And it was really funny because I was like, this book makes me uncomfortable, but I also couldn't put it down. So
Yeah,
that it was
that's
kind of
funny.
funny in that aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. It's like you're like my daughter. My daughter's like, because we've got the I Survived books, you know. You do know that series of,
I haven't
yeah,
read
and
that.
and we've got them, and I'm like, why don't you read these? She's like, I like to read happy books that have happy endings, and I'm like, okay,
Yep.
so
Yep.
yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for your time. Is there anything that we didn't get to touch on before I ask my final question?
Let's see. I guess one thing that you just mentioned that I think is interesting. You talked about like the kind of stuff that you hear from typically from women veteran authors or even veteran authors right now. I feel like a lot of the stuff that gets a lot of attention or I don't know, just gets a lot of traction, whatever. Is this military realism? Like a lot of time, like memoir type, stories, very focused on Iraq, Afghanistan, because that's like it touched so many of us in this demographic, and I guess I felt like I if people have done like a great job talking about that and covering that, and I think I wanted to talk about something a little bit different, a little bit fun in the sense that it's not it touches more on like these themes, right? And this is why fiction is so wonderful, that we can talk about themes at a distance, where we can say, oh, like I could see that, I can see myself there and I can relate to this and that without it being, I guess, so like viscerally like personal, I think I'm explaining that correctly, even though I feel like I'm kind of stumbling over it, but anyway.
No, I think you're right, because a lot of them are like leadership type books or memoir or even like history books covering like the history of things that have happened. And it was exciting to get a book that was fiction and not just like fiction, but still had that military connection where you can like talk about it at a distance, where you can like put some of yourself in it and people don't even know like what stories are part of you or things that you've heard from people. And just I think it was really cool because it's also a different genre to open up different people, who might not want to read those history books, but they like sci-fi, and that leads them to joining the military or at least being exposed to it. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's true.
So I always like to end my interviews with, what advice would you give to a young woman who's considering joining the military?
Wow, I love that question. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. What advice would I give the young women wanting to join the military? I would say, I would say, this is so practical. Be as physically fit as you possibly can be. I'm going to assume that said woman who wants to join the military, physically fit, physically and mentally tough. Let's put it that way. I'll be physical and mental toughness. I will assume that any woman who, young woman who's like, I have an interest, whatever, she probably knows she wants to, or, she's kind of venturing into the unknown. I remember when I would tell people that I wanted to go to the Naval Academy and they're like, and be a Marine, they're like, are you sure you want to do that? And I'm like, gosh, they think I can't do it and whatever, and, so I feel like that's less helpful, but I feel like there are certain blockers that do get in women's way when we go off to do these things and we underestimate how actually physically hard they are and how actually mentally hard they are. And so I think, I think if I had gone into these different places more physically fit and maybe a little bit more mentally tough, it would have been a little bit easier for me. But I think all of us, can look back and say, oh, if I had come in and I had known a little bit more, it would have been better. But, it is part of the journey. And so, but there it is, my very pragmatic advice, get as physically fit as possible.
I love that because I've asked this question so many times, and most of the time it's like, do your research, talk to women veterans, and I don't remember off the top of my head anyone being like, get as physically fit as possible, which is such an important piece of advice that we don't talk about enough. And when I wrote my book, A Girl's Guide to Military Service, I was focused on the mental aspect of boot camp because that was like the hardest part for me. And my friend was like, why didn't you write about the physical stuff? And I was like, oh yeah. So then that instead of having one chapter about boot camp, we ended up with two, one about the physical stuff, one about the mental stuff, because they're both really important to be both physically fit and mentally fit. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah. I think too, I think women, growing up through, young women all the way through high school, like we're not, it's not really like culturally, I guess, and maybe it's different now, I don't know, but like lifting weights, doing pull-ups, like doing all the stuff that males are kind of like, I mean, my son's 14, he's already in the gym, so it's kind of like this like norm, I guess, that we just run a lot and we don't, or maybe you don't run that much, whatever. But yeah, it is a really important aspect. And, I'm glad that I did see you had, about your book there, and I'm definitely going to grab a copy for my daughter someday. So.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to share this interview with everyone.
All right. Thanks. Lovely to meet you. Good to be here. Bye.